Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Mormon newscast. No, it is not Monday. You have not lost your minds. It's actually Friday, 1 p.m. on December 5th. We are doing what we call sort of a pop-up breaking news newscast because overnight there were a couple updates and some articles about Wade S. Christofferson, brother of D. Todd Christofferson, member of the LDS Church's first presidency. And if you follow us on the Mormon newscast, you know that we have been trying to cover this and get information out. So we thought it was important to kind of get together, drop everything middle of the day on Friday, and just sort of update you on some of the things that have been going on. And I will say it's sort of a fluid story because some things changed even in the last hour that I was really surprised about, and we'll be talking about that. So how are you, Bill and RFM? Are you ready to dive in yet again to this extremely difficult topic?
I'll just say that I was surprised at some of these details, and I think this was important for us to go live and for the audience to get updated on this story.
Me, I'm doing fine. Thanks, Rebecca. But then again, I'm not the one who's been up since 1 o'clock this morning working on this story like you.
Well, when I see an update, when I happen across it, and like I said, there are two. One did come in kind of late last night, and I think it's important because people have been following the story, and there hasn't been a lot of media coverage about it, and we've kind of been keeping it going, as has Floodlit, and we'll talk about that as we go to our first slide. But now, mainstream media is talking about some of these details, like Bill described, and it really does kind of explain more about what happened that I think we were all wondering about, upset about. So I think we can go right to our slideshow. We kind of threw some slides together. This is Bill's thumbnail here, which I thought was great. Bill does a great job.
By the way, that means that you threw all these slides together, doesn't it, Rebecca?
No, Bill threw some together. I also had some help from my friend, Unoriginal Jim, who is an incredible researcher, and he was able to put some timetables together because I think that's important to look at some of the dates. Like I said, everything's very fluid and a little confusing. So there'll be some spots where you might want to, freeze the screen and kind of look at things if you really want to find out more. So. Okay, let me see if I can move here. All right. So I just very quickly wanted to say that Floodlit has been covering this from the very beginning. Even before mainstream media got a hold of it, Floodlit, based on documents, legal documents, arrest documents, things like that, has been putting out information and also talking to alleged victims. So they kind of have a mix of information from police reporting and victims. So RFM, do you just want to read this really quick? This is their blurb at the top of the page on Floodlit. You can look up Wade S. Christofferson's name, and it'll just give you a very short blurb and then go into a very detailed, all documented, live links, kind of, a synopsis of what's happening.
Wade Christofferson, born in 1953, was an LDS Church member. I think he is an LDS Church member, accused of sexually assaulting 9 to 12 children in Illinois, Ohio, and Utah, starting in 1985. And these are all states in which I believe he lived, at least the Illinois and Ohio places. Charged in 2025 with child sexual abuse, alleged time frame 2010 to 25. And I think we can update that with the story that at least one of these accounts that he's arrested on is 2025. It's actually a month ago. This is once again December 5th, so it was around early November that the most recent allegation happened. Per victims, excommunicated in 1990s, he was rebaptized. He was assigned to leadership positions, including bishopric counselor. He's the brother of an apostle, D. Todd Christofferson, who allegedly knew as early as 2018 about the abuse.
So that's kind of the little synopsis there. And again, some of this information based on, police reporting and others working and talking to multiple victims, which is why we keep saying alleged and allegedly, because these are statements from victims, but we have to say that. So why, this is also from the Floodlit report, why was there no mainstream news coverage of this story from November 20th when it broke to November 25? And this is true. There were only a few of us out there that were, making shorts or putting it on the newscast about this. And I do believe it's probably because the mainstream media has to maybe wait for more of, charging documents or more, more things that are more solidified, and they're not going to put out alleged things that victims are saying. Do you think that's why that there was this gap here of 5 days?
It's hard to say. Sometimes the media misses stuff for a while, sometimes completely.
Yeah.
You remember back when the church released its essay about Joseph Smith's practice of polygamy, and there was nothing, and there was nothing. And it took around 5 days, and everybody's wondering, when is the media going to pick up on this? And then they finally did. And when they did, it was with a bang.
Yep. And here's your bang. Within 5 days, if you and I would Google his name, Wade S. Christofferson, every day to see, what's there, what's new, what's happening, how can I help update people? And then suddenly on that day, the 25th, these are only a few of the articles, but every news source seemed to cover at least those preliminary details. But even so, those details left, I think, some big gaping holes for most of us that were trying to understand it. And so what we're going to go through today really, like Bill said, paints a picture of some of the details that, again, you almost think it can't get any worse. And then it does get worse. The update that I came across last night, in the middle of the night, was from Floodlit. And they said that Wade Christofferson, I'm going to have you read that, Bill, because it's too small for me. This was the update last night.
It says Wade Christofferson was moved into U.S. Marshals custody on December 3rd, 2025, according to the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office. His current location is unknown. However, according to court documents, he is being extradited to Southern Ohio.
Okay, so that's from Floodlit. And maybe RFM, you can maybe explain what that means exactly. We know that he's been in the Salt Lake County jail for a while, and now it looks like he's in the custody of marshals. What does that mean exactly?
What it means is that he is charged federally. And the reason he's charged federally is because the allegations from a month ago have to do with interstate activities, specifically FaceTiming with an alleged 7-year-old victim in order to have her expose herself to him. So that's why the feds are involved. And I believe that the alleged victim is in Utah. And at the time, a month ago, Wade Christofferson was where he lives, which is in Dublin, Ohio. So, of course, it's across state lines. That's why the federales are involved. That's why he was charged, as I believe now, in federal court. And the federal court in Ohio now wants him. So they issued a warrant for his arrest based upon the charge that was made against him for this activity of a month ago. He was picked up in Utah. Now, that's the question that we don't know the answer to. There's a lot of questions, but this is one of the main ones right now, is why was Wade in Utah instead of Ohio to be arrested? Don't know, but that's where he was arrested. Now he's got to be extradited back to to Ohio for federal prosecution through the federal court system there. And I will just say that, he's obviously waived extradition, as I expected he would, and as 99% of people in that situation do. So he's waived extradition, which means then the federal marshals came out to pick him up, to extradite him back to Ohio. According to the information, they picked him up on December 3rd, which is 2 days ago, which means that unless they all took a detour to Disneyland, they are no doubt back in Ohio now. And that's where he's in custody.
Okay.
I just
go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I just want to add one little thing, which is you raised the question, and we don't have enough information to give the answer, but why is he in Utah? My brain wants to go to certain possibilities, but without information, we just couldn't possibly know. But it is a strange development that he ends up being in Utah when this all goes down.
Yeah, he'll have time to regret not having gone to Aruba instead.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we'll find out more about that from the Salt Lake Tribune article. But yeah, that is a huge question. Why Utah? When Utah? And hopefully there'll be more information that comes out about that. So,
who in Utah? What was the purpose to coming into Utah, and what conversations were had here in this great state?
Exactly. And then remember, as I reported on the newscast last week, there was a source who's connected to the church who has broken big news and was correct about it, that said, that D. Todd Christofferson was the one that turned Wade in. So I have no idea if that is accurate or if that would, even, how would that even make sense? Or why would that even be part of the story? I don't know. And again, that's just alleged from the source who posted that and then removed the post. So I don't know. Lots of moving parts.
It is like the opening of Godfather, coming in to kiss the ring of the Godfather in Salt Lake City and hope to get a favor. And I know Bill can do a great impression of Brando from that movie. But then he finds out, no, he's not going to do the favor. In fact, I'm picking up the phone now because you have become an effing liability.
Yeah. I don't, if D. Todd Christofferson was aware of what was happening, there'd be no other choice but to do that for anyone.
And that's a total if, by the way. Yes, I want to make that clear. Thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah. Completely alleged speculating, which we probably shouldn't do. We just try to connect dots, you know. All right, let's move on. So what we're talking about today, the first update was that he's now with U.S. Marshals. Some people in the chat are wondering, is this new? No, we're not rehashing old details. We gave a brief summary. These are all new details, and there are a lot of new details. The first one is that he is no longer in the Salt Lake County Jail. He's with U.S. Marshals, moving to, as RFM thinks, Ohio, you know, to face the judicial system there. So this article came out, brother of LDS apostle allegedly sent sexually explicit letters to Utah girl last month. And this is front page of the Tribune when I woke up today. I don't know if it's still on the front page, but it was when I woke up and checked my phone like I always do. So
it's not in the same form as it originally appeared, is it, Rebecca? Changes have been made since.
Yeah, and that's what I've talked about by fluid. As we'll go through this, I took screenshots, which we're going to go through, of the article, some of the relevant paragraphs that will share the new details. And then as I was rereading the article in preparation for this, to make sure I had everything correct and I wasn't going to, you know, go off on a tangent, I noticed that some things had been changed at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. And it's interesting what was changed, and we'll go into that because I have the screenshots from before 1 p.m. Mountain Time. And had I not reread the article, I never would have even known that there was a change. But I always try to, you know, read things right before we go on. So,
Rebecca, we went live at 1 p.m. Mountain Time, didn't we?
Oh, Eastern Time. Sorry, Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Yeah, is where it says in the Tribune, it says this was updated. You're right. You're absolutely right. Thank you for keeping us always on track with dates and times. So many moving parts. So we're just going to take turns reading through some of the key paragraphs in this Salt Lake Tribune article and kind of talking about, you know, what it means and the new information especially. So let's just start. RFM, you read the first one. We can all comment. And Bill, you read the second. We'll just kind of go through and let people know what happened here in this article.
The path that led Ohio prosecutors, once again, that's confusing to me, and it has been confusing all along. These are apparently federal prosecutors in Ohio, as opposed to what I would call Ohio prosecutors. But the path that led federal prosecutors in Ohio to charge Wade S. Christofferson with attempting to sexually exploit a child began 1 month ago, when they say a Utah father figured out the code that Wade Christofferson had been using with his daughter, i.e. the Utah father's daughter. Once again, Wade Christofferson in Ohio, the Utah father in Utah, and it's his 7-year-old daughter. And he figures out the code. Obviously, there's a connection, and probably familial, between Wade S. Christofferson, the father, and the 7-year-old girl.
Yeah, I think we all had that question. First of all, the fact that they were FaceTiming gave us a timestamp, because FaceTime was invented in 2010, more widely used in 2012. So we're not talking about a scenario from the 80s or the 90s. And then, like you said, the idea of a much older person FaceTiming a child in another state, the only thing that comes to my mind is, you know, some kind of family member. That's the only thing that would come to my mind. I'm sure there are other scenarios, but Bill, any thoughts on that first? Oh, go ahead.
And Wade Christofferson has apparently been sending the 7-year-old girl written letters in which he's established the code that we'll be talking about here momentarily.
Yeah, when we get to that code, which again will be maybe 7 or 8 slides from now, it's important to note, like, it takes time and effort to get someone to understand what a code is and how all that works. And I'll just note too, one of the other details that was part of this story was that some of the victims had been abused across various state lines. And that also insinuates that we've got a familial relation as well. So when you put multiple facets of this story together, it seems like that is almost certain, at least the very most likely interpretation of what's going on.
Yeah, and that's absolutely heartbreaking when you think children allegedly in wards, church settings, and then children allegedly in a family. You know, it's just all over the spectrum, and that's what happens, and it's absolutely horrifying. All right, Bill, do you want to take this one, or do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I just want to know one more thing, which is I'm not saying that all the victims are likely family, just that some of them are. It seems from what some of the victims said that perhaps some of the victims were not family as well. We have an alleged large group of victims here. It said 9 to 12.
Yeah.
Each of those are going to have their own unique story.
Yep, that's true. You can read this one, Bill.
Okay. The federal prosecutors allege Christofferson had been using this secret language to shield his sexually explicit request of the 7-year-old girl in letters. He had been sending her from Ohio for at least 6 months. The Utah father discovered the code on November 5th, prosecutors say, after he overheard a FaceTime conversation between his daughter and Christofferson and began asking them questions.
Any thoughts or comments on that? I just can't even imagine.
This is happening in November 5th. This is not
a month ago.
Years and decades ago. They would still be atrocious even if they were older, but we would have been thinking that this might have been disclosures from now adults who were children at the time. No, this is happening right now with children.
From the previous slide too, another thing I think is a big deal here. Wade Christofferson, based on Floodlit and what the victims are saying, had a lifetime of attempts or carried out sexual abuse on children. It is not until somebody works outside the church system, decades after the original incident and after what is said to be 9 to 12 different incidents, or at least victims, maybe with more incidents than that, before law enforcement actually has the knowledge to be able to do something about it.
Because it had all been handled, presumably, internally within the church, and I'm putting handled in air quotes, but it was all done within the church and not involving law enforcement, apparently.
Yeah, and we'll see that is the route that Wade prefers to go in a couple slides here.
Well, of course, it's the route that any child molester would prefer to go.
Exactly. So yeah, I can't even imagine what it would be like to be a parent and having your child, FaceTiming with a trusted individual, whatever, call from relative, and then start hearing something that then starts you down the path of questioning both of them. What exactly are you talking about is what it sounds like happens. So, okay, so I'll read this one. It says the police started investigating a week later after the Utah man's brother in Ohio reported that Christofferson had allegedly sexually abused his daughter too. Okay, now I'm going to take the next slide too, because this is something that was changed. And this is what made me feel like I was crazy for a minute.
Okay, so apparently we do have two brothers here. We've got Wade Christofferson. I'm trying to break it down. This is rather densely reported. We've got Wade Christofferson, the alleged perpetrator, in custody. We've got a brother of Wade who lives in Utah.
No, not a brother of Wade.
No,
just two random brothers. Two brothers.
They just happen to be brothers to themselves, the fathers of the victim.
Exactly. There are brothers, I don't even want to get specific, within families who have children.
Okay. But we would presume then that if they've got little children, they're in the same family with Wade. He's obvious. He's 73 years old.
Exactly. You can do all that math.
Could be grandchildren of his. The adults could be grandchildren of his and the alleged victim's great-grandchildren.
Or closer if you do the math. He's only 72. So again, this is all alleged. We don't want to get super specific, but there's a Utah man who has a 7-year-old daughter, and there's an Ohio man who also has a daughter. They are brothers. They have little children.
Thank you.
And the Ohio man says he allegedly abused my daughter too. Okay. So you got the two brothers, and the Ohio man is the one that contacts the police. Now, this is the screenshot I took earlier today at 1 p.m. Eastern time. When I went back to read the article, this is what it said. Police started investigating a week later after a man in Ohio who knew about the alleged abuse in Utah reported that Christofferson had allegedly sexually abused his daughter too.
So they changed the brother connection and take it out and just make him a generic man in Ohio?
Yes. That's why I thought I was crazy at first until I realized, no, I took the screenshot.
No, you're not crazy. They're changing it now. Either they're changing it to provide better information or to provide less information.
Right.
Yeah.
Or maybe they were wrong in the first place, but then I think they would have had to do a retraction. So I'm not sure, but apparently Ohio man is aware of Utah man's daughter's abuse and says my own daughter was also abused. So what do you
Because
think about this
Utah
change,
man
Bill?
probably called Ohio man and said,
Mhm.
can you believe what, Wade did? And I guess Ohio man says, well, yeah, he did it to my daughter too. Or maybe he started asking his daughter and some disclosures came up that way. And then he calls the cops.
Yeah, Ohio man calls the cops, not Utah man.
Right.
And I'll just note too, there are 2 times this happened. This isn't the only instance. We'll go over another change here shortly.
Right.
As you pointed out, RFM, it can be done to correct the record or to distance people from having as much information. If it is distancing people from having as much information, there's a good reason for that. One would want to shield victims from being discovered for sure. But I will note that that doesn't seem like a good explanation for the other change. So
no, it doesn't. This isn't about the victim. This is about other people. This is about adults. And this is about trying to, it appears to be, it's about trying to distance the reader from information that would lead them to understanding the story more fully and accurately.
Yes. And what I was going to say is that when that happens, what you just described, people ought to pay closer attention, because when someone's trying to throw you off the trail, there's a reason. And you and I have learned from experience in the past on other issues that when that happens, generally, if you keep digging, there's some other point here that some entity or group of people would not like us to find.
Yes. And I think we would be naive to think that the Salt Lake Tribune has this article out without any contact from the church about giving suggestions as to how it should be reported.
Yeah. It could also be editors just go, you know what, this is too much information. It is not going to be hard to figure out if we go down this family route, and maybe it really is to protect the victim. I don't know. I mean,
No.
I'm kind of uncomfortable. I don't want any undue pressure or notoriety on somebody who's been abused in this way. So I don't know. It's hard to report on. But anyway, that change was made, and make of that what you will. Okay. I think it's RFM's turn to read the next paragraph in this article. And again, I kind of picked and chose among them, just so we can get the gist of the story with the important details.
Yeah, the reporter insists on calling Wade Christofferson simply Christofferson, which is a mistake where you've got other Christoffersons in the story. In reports on cases from courts of appeal and Supreme Courts, when you have situations like this, which happen, they will frequently say, okay, we're just going to refer to this Christofferson by the first name, not out of disrespect, but for clarity's sake. So this is Wade Christofferson, whose older brother is an apostle and member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, governing First Presidency, D. Todd Christofferson. So Wade was charged on November 20th in federal court in Ohio with attempting to sexually exploit a minor, which makes a lot more sense when you hear about the facts alleged here, along with a second count of coercion and enticement, which probably comes from the same set of facts. The 72-year-old, that's Wade, was booked into jail that same day in Utah on November 20th.
Yep. Any comments about that? We'll go through a timeline later because everything happened very quickly within like a 3-week period. And when you see this timeline that we're going to show you, it's very revelatory as far as what is happening and the process and perhaps what Wade is thinking and what he's trying to do. So any
By the way,
comments
not
on
to
that?
get in advance of the story, Rebecca, but also during this time period, it appears that I think both the Utah man and the Ohio man spoke directly or communicated directly with Wade Christofferson, because they report that he confessed to them what he did.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that for sure. Bill, any other thoughts on this? This just kind of To the story.
Yeah, only a little bit of a snide remark, which is I wonder if the church really likes its full name being used in these kinds of situations.
That's why I took my time with it.
You did. You really milked it, every little jot and tittle, right? Okay, let's see. All right, Bill, I think it's your turn here.
All right. The charging document alleges Christofferson was FaceTiming with the Utah girl on November 5th when her father overheard him asking her to see the snow and friends. After Christofferson's request, federal prosecutors say the girl went into the bathroom closet, closed the door. Her father opened the door a few seconds later, according to the charges, and found the girl lifting up her shirt to the camera. So it's essentially saying here that Wade Christofferson says to the girl that he wants to see snow and friends, and this is the code language for the girl to then expose herself. So then she goes into a closet away from parents, away from adults, and begins to carry out that request, is what they're alleging. When the dad opens the door, discovers that something out of the ordinary is happening, completely inappropriate, and then at that point, obviously deals with it.
Yeah, and just to make it absolutely clear that this is a FaceTime call. So Wade is allegedly on the other end of the call in Ohio, the girl's in Utah, and he can see her, she can see him. So now at his request to see snow and friends, she goes into a private place and begins lifting up her shirt with the camera in front of her to allow him to see her.
Yeah, and that dad, I mean, vigilant, right? Listening to the conversation but trusting the person on the other side of the conversation, obviously, but then hearing something unusual, and then when the daughter, quickly goes away privately, he's going to take action right there. But then, as someone mentioned in the comments, I don't believe that the Utah dad did contact the police. It sounds like there were some other moving parts in that, and it was the Ohio dad. But Bill brought up, and the idea that for him to say on November 5th, I want to see snow and friends, I almost can't even get those words out. There are months of grooming and letters and games in childlike language to explain what that means to get a child to do that. Do you guys agree with that?
This would take considerable amount of time and effort to get a 7-year-old child to clearly understand what is meant by the code words. It isn't something you could do in one letter or one FaceTime conversation. It would require multiple attempts to get that person to understand that.
There also has to be a reason for the privacy. Now, obviously, it doesn't take as much persuasion with a 7-year-old, especially if you know them. But this has to be private. It cannot be done with other people around. So she has to understand that too, and that takes some grooming and some education in advance.
Oh, that's such a good point. Mommy and daddy can't know about snow and friends, and and the fact that she so quickly knew exactly what to do to run to the closet. That's terrifying. Absolutely,
and unlikely
terrifying.
The first time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. So those are some of the details today that we read that we thought, what, this just really paints a picture, even far worse, I think, than some of the things that we thought we knew before. So then it goes on to say the Utah girl told her father and later investigators. So investigators did come to the Utah house, whether or not it was because Ohio dad called or we don't know those details. The Utah girl told her father and later investigators that Christofferson had taught her the code words and that friends meant nipples and snow referred to her genitals. Almost can't even read that. The father told investigators that Christofferson had been sending his daughter letters over the past 6 months that used these and other sexual code words. I'm assuming they have the letters, don't you think? I mean,
would think so.
If it's a physical letter in the mail, a FaceTime call, I don't know that you can get those records, to show what was said, but a physical letter, RFM, that would be something they would introduce into court, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So any other thoughts on these gruesome details? Ugh.
It's just gross. Again, this guy has a long history of this, and there are so many places along the way this could have been stopped. happening within family. There was some degree of family ignoring it, seeing Wade as rehabilitated, giving him more time and space with. Anyway, it's just as horrific.
Yeah, and somebody in the comments just mentioned letters mean federal. Is that correct, RFM?
Well, yeah, because they go over
Across state
lines,
yeah.
and also in the federal postal system. But
Yep.
that alone, yeah.
Okay. All right. RFM, I think it's your turn to continue reading.
The Utah girl also told investigators that Wade Christofferson had touched her inappropriately in the past. So obviously, they were together, and told her, quote, that she would like it when she got older, end quote, according to the charges. So, from Ohio to Utah with this girl, but in the past they've been together so that he could touch her. I mean, it's obviously family.
Yeah. I'd be hard pressed to find another explanation, honestly, about that. So, although I agree with you, Bill, I've been in contact with a couple of victims that in the past 80s, 90s, I believe those were more ward members and opportunities within the ward, allegedly.
I would add that this girl is 7 years old, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So if Christofferson Wade touched her in the past and she was old enough to remember it and remember that he told her that she would like it when she got older, this probably happened within the last 3 years, the actual touching.
That's a good point. Because if she were 3, if she were 2, if she were 4, she might not remember those things, but those are specific details. So.
It's recent is what I'm saying, whether it's 3 or 4 years or even 5.
Yep.
Yeah. I'll just note too, remember, this is abuse that happened after the church had already known about his past, had placed an annotation on his record, and then out of some seeming favor for him on some angle, removed that annotation. Again, we're almost certainly, as you point out, Rebecca, looking at abuse that happened with both family and others. But this is a church that allowed him to continue to be in spaces where he could abuse. And this is a family that seemingly extended some degree of grace and allowance that he had been rehabilitated and allowed their kids and grandkids to be in his presence again.
Yeah, that's the really tragic part. And someone in the chat is asking, when was that annotation removed? We know he was in a bishopric, the first of the 3 he would be in 2006. And I actually, I'm going to talk about this, I think, on the newscast on Monday. I've been talking to a source who knows a lot about the annotation, and it's a very interesting process. Little known process, and it kind of sheds light on all of this. But to answer that, at least by 2006, because he would not have been able, apparently there's a system where you can't even, submit someone for a calling, online. It's all online now. I don't know about 2006. If they have a certain red flag, it will not even let you do that. And that is supposed to, stop, say, an elders quorum president who doesn't have access to a red flag on a record from putting somebody in a calling. He just would try and it wouldn't accept the name, and then it would have to be escalated to the bishop. So
I know we had a question about it on the last newscast, but your source has confirmed that first presidency approval must be obtained in order to have an asterisk removed, correct?
Yes, although my source did say that there are committees of general authorities who get stacks of these on their desks, and they kind of go through the details, and then they make recommendations, which then the first presidency will see. I mean, think about all the stuff the first presidency has to approve: sealing cancellations, annotation removal, so it's sort of a second party. The general authority assesses it. And my source thought possibly even apostle might oversee this, or an apostle might be involved in this process. When it comes to abuse, though, I did learn from another source that, say, children are abused, the children are asked to write letters to the first presidency to say, I'm okay if my dad, gets the annotation taken away so that he can move forward. It's interesting because the reason an annotation is removed, and I've talked to various sources, seems to always be concern for the perpetrator, that the perpetrator be allowed to move forward on his spiritual journey, to be able to fully participate, and have those benefits. So it really is more about concern for this person and the people making these decisions and calls. Oh, he seems fine. Yeah, that was years ago. I'm sure he's fine. Let's remove
He's
it.
repented.
They are in no way, they have no credential to be able to evaluate whether someone like allegedly Wade Christofferson is going to be a repeat offender for decades. So,
And once again, putting the pressure on the victims, whether children or adults now,
yeah,
that the pressure is on them to say,
forgive.
yeah, it's okay for my perpetrator to be received back into the church in full fellowship. With what goes along with it was, if you don't, then you're the worst person. You're the worser person in LDS doctrine. Because if you don't forgive someone who's offended against you, according to the Doctrine and Covenants, you have the greater sin. This is once again re-victimizing victims in this crazy system where victims are not protected, they're not valued, they're re-victimized, and the perpetrators are protected and lionized.
Yeah. Can I add another thing too?
Yeah.
The church can't have it both ways. You can't on one hand say this is a church ran by revelation and these things require first presidency approval. And then on the other hand, say, oh, this just goes to a committee and some rando area 70s or whatever, general authority 70s look over the list and mark whether this is approved or not. You can't have it both ways. Either these decisions are made by the first presidency or they're not. And if they're not, you don't get to say that they are and then go some other route. Number one. Number two is that, again, even if you want to go to that length and go, wasn't the top three, some underling approves these, not going to buy into the fact, I'm going to let these guys have it both ways. You're still dealing with the brother of an apostle and now member of the first presidency. Hard to believe that just went to some underling and that's who made the decision. That makes no sense at all. And so don't let the church out of this one.
Yeah, there are a lot of unknowns. And again, I'm just dealing with various sources that contact me who have personal, experience with this annotation. So everything, of course, is alleged. The person, higher up that I talked to, about how it kind of worked. Again, this is just somebody telling me. So of course we need to corroborate everything. But the person who told me about their family situation, where a family member had abused, the stake president asked if the annotation could be removed, submitted that to Salt Lake. The first presidency required a letter from the children that were abused. The children, now adults, refused to write the letter. And according to my source, another family member, the annotation removal process was still, being in process. It was still most likely going to happen. They didn't know. But so the letter didn't seem to have any effect either way, except for to re-victimize these children who had been abused. So I don't know. I can see.
It's like the law of Sarah in Doctrine and Covenants 132. The wife has to give her permission for a man to take a second wife. But if she doesn't give her permission,
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
so I can see what they were trying to do. I can see the idea of the annotation, the idea of the online record, the idea that a bishop and the clerks apparently can see this annotation. Was not clear whether a counselor could see it, but the process did seem to be that the clerk, a new person moves in, you receive their records, right? That's just online. The clerk looks and there is an annotation. The clerk then alerts the bishop, and then the bishop calls Salt Lake and is able to find out more information about what the annotation is. The person I spoke to said they only saw annotations for CSA. And this person said in their tenure in leadership over a specific area, they had seen 12 of these in 10 years. Does that sound small? Does that sound large?
It sounds like more than one a year in one stake.
Yes, times how many? So to me, that was kind of, oh my goodness. Again, this is just one source that I was able to talk to. So the system is in place then that this annotation should work. A calling should not be able to be extended. The system will kick out the name if there's an annotation. But then you have this option. He's a great guy. I know him. He's awesome. He really needs to be able to do this and that. And he can't progress unless we take this off. Right. No talking to a therapist, no talking to a counselor, no talking to anybody that would have any credential to be able to tell, is this person safe?
He
And
talked to
so
his bishop. His
well-meaning,
bishop knows.
yes, well-meaning people take the system that should be kind of foolproof and make it completely obsolete, is kind of what I got from these
Rebecca,
conversations I'm having.
can I just add that in LDS theology and in practice, the bishop is called a judge in Israel. And he is believed to have the spiritual gift of discernment and being able to judge the people who are in his congregation, in his ward. And when they come to him, to be able to tell when they have repented sufficiently. Mormon doctrine does not believe that Mormon bishops can forgive sins, but he has the power to tell when someone has repented sufficiently that they can be rebaptized and have their blessings restored and go on about being a normal, regular member with the access to children that every other member has. And that's a lot in the Mormon church.
Yep. And then there's that darker side where people just don't happen into callings with children. They're able to maneuver themselves into callings with children. And you know that can happen. You don't want to think about that, but it does.
Absolutely. What is the hardest position to fill in every ward? It's the primary workers. It's the people who are teaching each of the years. All the kids are separated in different years, right? For Sunday school or whatever they call it. And they have to have teachers for each one. And it's always a pain for every bishop to be able to fill all those callings. And these end up being the callings that are given to, I don't want to say the least qualified people, but let's just say you got a bunch of callings as a bishop you got to fill with people who know what they're doing, who are competent. And you got all these leadership callings, and you got to stick all your competent people in them. And then you got a bunch of other callings where you just sort of catch as catch can, right? Anybody with a pulse will do, who will come out and do the calling. And I want to go to Bill here because he's actually been a bishop amongst the three of us, and he'll let us know if this is true. This has certainly been my impression. I was in a bishopric, though not a bishop like Bill. And you just try and get whoever you can, which ends up meaning that, you know, you're just putting your kids at risk right and left. Was that your experience, Bill?
Okay, be specific. You're asking in terms of when I met with, when I was running the affairs of the ward and deciding who got to be in responsibilities.
Yeah. Was there basically, you know, a cutoff? There's basically all these leadership callings. And I know this is one of the big things that's very time consuming for bishops. They have to make sure that the callings are filled. People are leaving or being released all the time, and you have to keep it going. You got to keep those plates spinning. Is it correct that usually more qualified, more dependable, more trustworthy people get the leadership callings, which means that the less trustworthy and dependable people get the non-leadership callings, like being the teachers for the kids?
So that's 100% true. You're trying to make the best decision you can about obviously what a bishop's doing. But I'll say this too. There were times where our ward clerk tried to be really good. He tried to be a really good ward clerk. He kept his eye on newspapers. He kept his eye on things going on in the community. And anytime he heard something about a member, but there were numerous occasions where he brought in a newspaper clipping of somebody in our ward. Once it was active, a couple times it was an inactive person who had done something criminal. And we in the ward wouldn't have known about it if it wasn't for his being a sleuth. I only say that to say that there are so many people in our wards who we see a smile on their face. We see them in a suit and tie. We see them wearing a dress. And we assume that, you know, they've got the Holy Ghost. Look at the countenance in their eyes. And in reality, you don't have a clue who someone is outside of the, I'll say 3-hour block, because that's when I was going. You don't know who someone is outside the 3-hour block versus who they are at church. And we Mormons have been taught to trust people on the wrong basis, the wrong kinds of litmus test.
Yeah, no, that's true. And remember, RFM, you reported on a story, I think it was last week or the week before, or maybe it was Bill, about somebody who'd been arrested for CSA and said he was hoping to get into a calling where he would have access to children. I mean, he admitted that. But I will say this, given the person in upper leadership that I talked to, this person said that they had only requested once to have an annotation removed. And it was for somebody that had been decades and decades and decades ago. But even that was a wrestle, right? To think, do I do this so this person can serve in these other ways? Do I? It was like a wrestle. And then the other wrestle was, wrestling with yourself, the other wrestle was, there were people that had annotations. They were not in certain callings. It just means you can't have a calling with children. But we all know everyone in the ward has access to children all the time. And so all this leader could do is to alert certain key members in the ward to watch this person. Let's tell the Relief Society president, keep an eye. That was it. And that's just someone in upper leadership that was aware and thinking at least a little bit about what danger could be. So the annotation only keeps you away from certain callings. It doesn't keep you out of the building. It's just extremely problematic.
I've got a story really quick. When I was serving as bishop, we had an older couple in our ward. They were probably in their, early 70s or so. And they had a son that came to visit them. The son was in his 40s, 50s. He wasn't a member of our ward. We didn't have any natural ability to keep track of who he was or what his past was. He had been coming to visit mom and dad for years at this point, 1 or 2 years. Come every month and spend a Sunday with them, going to church with them. And here it is, after a long time of him attending our ward sporadically from time to time, somebody fills us in that, hey, just FYI, this guy's on the list of being a child abuser. And so, I do my due diligence to double check it. You go to the link, it's wherever his state he's from, but it has, there's a listing there with his mugshot and the information on the charges that he had. And so from that point forward, we did notified him like, hey, I don't have permission of those above me to tell you that you can't go to church. But with the moment you walk in the door here to the moment you leave, there will be 2 high priests that will follow you everywhere, including the restroom. And that's how we did it. But he was in our ward for 25 times before I became aware of that. Now that can happen anywhere. That's not just Mormonism.
Exactly.
But I'll just say, Mormonism puts so much emphasis on trusting spiritual answers that Mormons don't even have the wherewithal to go looking or have skepticism about such things. It only makes these issues more complicated when Mormon theology gets in the way.
Yep, that's absolutely it. Trust and discernment is a huge thing. This kind of blows discernment out of the water, I think, if you really look at this. So, okay, I think I've lost track. Is it your turn, RFM? I think it is.
This is the next slide in.
Yes, the next slide. Here we go.
Wade
we had a little tangent
Christofferson
there. Sorry, but it was important, I think.
Yeah. Wade Christofferson also allegedly admitted to the Ohio father that he, Wade Christofferson, sexually abused apparently the Ohio father's 10-year-old daughter several years ago, more than a dozen times, the documents say. Christofferson has not been charged in state courts in Utah or Ohio in connection to these allegations as of Thursday.
So what does this mean? Because it says in the article they're getting this from the charging documents, but now this says he hasn't been charged. How do we understand that?
Well, he's charged in federal court for the stuff involving the postal service and crossing state lines.
Okay.
But jurisdiction for a basic child abuse in Ohio that doesn't have those extra components would be charged in Ohio by the Ohio prosecutor in Ohio state courts. Okay. And the same in Utah, because the 7-year-old girl of the Utah dad says that he had touched her inappropriately, apparently in Utah at some point, and told her that when she's older, she will like it. So that would be the subject properly of a state court criminal prosecution in Utah. I think that's what that's referencing, and that charges have not been made yet. Of course, why would you at this point? Because he's being prosecuted federally. In other words, there's no great hurry to do that. He's in custody. And I expect that the feds are going to have priority anyway. In other words, they're going to get to run their case first before any state court gets their chance at Wade Christofferson.
So
If they file now and he's in federal custody, then you get into all these additional difficulties, or at least complications of speedy trial and things like that.
okay, so the charges seem to stem from these two scenarios. They'd be cousins if the fathers were brothers. So there are so many other victims that Floodlit is talking to. I'm talking to a couple of relatives of victims. You know, is there a they couldn't kind of get involved in these cases, or could they? Could there be a whole bunch of people that, or would they have to then file their own? You know, these would be from way in the past.
We're talking about criminal cases, criminal charges right now.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm saying is these charges that we're reading about have nothing to do with the victims back in the 80s, back in the 90s. These are the two little girls now. How the victims way back in the 80s and 90s, can they pile onto this, or do they have to, you know, kind of start their own
I don't
case?
think so.
Get their own attorney?
I think this is very specifically limited to the federal charges, which
Okay,
have to
that
do
was
with
my
this
question.
girl in Utah who's being abused allegedly by Wade from Ohio,
Okay.
by the mail and then by FaceTime. And I think that's what both those charges are. And those are properly in federal court. The others would have to be done, I expect, in state court, unless there's one of these components that makes it
Okay.
for federal. But usually they don't. This one does. And now I understand it better now that we have these additional details from this article.
Okay, that makes sense. It gets a little confusing, and we really weren't aware of these girls prior to this article coming out. We didn't know exactly what it meant or what was happening. We were kind of thinking, oh, the past victims, you know, there was some confusion there, but past
By the
victims,
way,
current victims.
I'm so sorry, Rebecca.
No, go ahead.
I just want to make the same comment about this girl, of the daughter of the Ohio father. She's 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Several years ago, that means 2 or 3. And obviously it wasn't more than 10. It probably wasn't more than 5. But Wade had abused her more than a dozen times, the documents say, and has admitted to it. So all of this is also relatively recent. These are not old disclosures from people who are in their 40s now saying this happened when I was a kid.
I also, if Christofferson lived in Ohio,
Yes.
and he's dealing with brothers in Ohio and Utah who both have children who have been abused by Wade Christofferson, one would wonder what other Christoffersons live in Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
And at the very least, we know, you know, certain ones don't. It would seem, again, likely that we're talking about direct family of Wade Christofferson, and probably much more immediate than not.
Yeah, I think that's a legitimate conclusion to arrive at. So, okay, let's have Bill read the next one here.
Christofferson allegedly admitted abusing the two girls to their fathers, according to the charging document, and told the Utah man in a November 6th text message, quote, "I am deeply sorry for what I have done and will be meeting with my bishop to start the repentance process."
Okay, so
Oh,
that's
good.
a
Then we
quote.
can just let it all go.
Right, that's a
Everything's
direct
fine.
quote. Do you guys see the quotes there?
Yes,
I am
I do.
deeply sorry for what I have done and will be meeting with my bishop to start the repentance process. And so I'm assuming, since it says it's a text, the fathers or father have this text, right? That's why it's in quotes. That's
Oh,
why
yes.
it's in paper. But now let's have, so this is another thing that I thought I was crazy. This is what it was this morning when I snapped the screenshot, and when I went to reread the article this afternoon, and we'll let Bill read and comment on this. This is what it said now. No more direct quote or even any kind of allusion to a direct quote.
Yeah, Christofferson allegedly admitted abusing the two girls to their fathers, according to the charging document. The charging documents also say that Christofferson had indicated he wanted to start the repentance process with his bishop. By the way, this change only makes sense to protect the church and to protect who was having that conversation, adults, and why they were having that conversation. So again, we've got the brother of a member of the first presidency apparently sitting down in some sort of situation where he's able to communicate with both the brother from Utah and the brother from Ohio, acknowledged to both of them that he had abused kids on both sides, and whoever he's talking to, it seems like it's this conversation that he's able to indicate, hey, I'm going to go start seeing my bishop now to get this process started. So the question becomes, and I think it's the main reason why this change happened, is that when you start to think about in what setting would Wade Christofferson sit down with both, again, not necessarily physically sitting, but on a telephone, in some sort of call where all three people are either conferenced in or can see each other, talk face to face, where would Wade Christofferson sit down with a brother from Utah, a brother from Ohio, not necessarily his brothers, although that's one possibility, and have a conversation where he admits the abuse of both the children of those two brothers and able to indicate that he is going to get started on the repentance process? My mind wanders to certain kinds of situations, and those situations would deeply explain why he was in Salt Lake as well.
That is interesting. I had not thought of that. Wow. And again, a typo here on my slide. RFM is correct. It was 1 p.m. Eastern time that correction was made. But as somebody pointed out in the chat, we keep saying allegedly, but in the prior slide, here he says, I'm sorry for what I have done, and I will be meeting with my bishop to start the repentance process. So is that considered, RFM, a confession? I mean, would that be something that's admissible in court? Is it just part of the evidence?
Absolutely, it's admissible.
Okay.
I'll just say again, I'm not trying to beat a dead horse, but think about it. Why would you change, quote, I am deeply sorry for what I have done and will be meeting with my bishop to start the repentance process?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. To the charging documents also say Christofferson had indicated he wanted to start the repentance process with his bishop. One takes it from a first person sort of narrative and moves it to a third person sort of narrative. And that's really all that it accomplishes. And that only makes sense to me if you don't want people asking questions about what is this meeting? Where is this meeting at where this quote took place? And the change seems to distance the reader from being able to notice that that's going on.
They also took out, I am deeply sorry for what I have done. That doesn't exist anymore. That's kind of huge. I'm deeply sorry for what I have done. Now it's just, I want to start repenting.
I will note that the November 6th text appears to have been made the day after the disclosure, which was November 5th.
Right. And we'll look at that timeline. That's why that's important. And that's coming up here because it is all over the place with talking to police, talking to each other, in and out
I'm bringing that up because that would have been a very quick move to Utah if indeed he had gone to Utah to do that text message the following day.
It would have. Yeah, it's very confusing as you try to dissect it. So let's see, I'll read this. The police in Dublin, Ohio, where Wade Christofferson lives, searched his home in November, and a review of his phone allegedly revealed a search history for criminal defense attorneys in Ohio and Utah, as well as the phrase, in Ohio, do clergy have to report child abuse confessions? So our slide before said, I'm going to go work with my bishop. Is he trying to find out where it's better to work with someone? Does he want to know what's going to happen to him when he talks to his bishop? How do you guys read this?
I think he expects that he'll be facing criminal charges both in Ohio and in Utah. And that makes sense based upon what we've heard so far in this article, that he may well have perpetrated in both states. But in Ohio, do clergy have to report child abuse confessions? That's an interesting thing for him to be asking the computer or asking anybody, in light of the fact that he's also said that he's going to be going to his bishop to start the repentance process. He should have just picked up the phone and called the hotline and they would have told him.
And somebody was asking in the chat, when was he released from his stake Sunday school calling? And that was on the 24th of November, before it even broke out in the news.
On the 24th of November?
I have a source that can tell me who's in what calling, and he was released before all this even hit the mainstream media on the 24th or the 23rd. I think it was the 24th, though.
Well, that's still
Could-
almost 3 weeks after.
Yeah, could have been the 23rd, could have been the 24th. I can't remember exactly,
More
but
than 2 weeks. More
Yeah.
than 2 weeks at least.
Yeah. So okay. All right. Let's see. RFM. I think you can read the next one here.
The answer in Ohio, according to a 2025 law, is that it depends on how the clergy learned of the abuse. In Utah, the law says clergy may report abuse obtained through a confession, but it does not require them to do so.
So we talk about that a lot, don't we? You can, but you don't have to.
But obviously, if he's Googling the question, then that would probably govern whether he talked to a bishop in Ohio, and if so, what he said to him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
He's trying to figure out the lay of the land before he goes in.
Yeah. Yep. As anybody would. Okay.
Which suggests not so much repentance as calculation.
And that's true. Okay, Bill, I added this. This was not in the article today, but this has been in all the articles prior to it. And Bill had put this in the slideshow. So,
according to court filing details, when authorities searched his home in Ohio, they discovered a modified attic space accessible via a child-sized door labeled H. Potter. So he has a Harry Potter room. And inside found children's writing on the walls plus bedding, suggesting potential concealment or grooming space.
You know, it's interesting because the first, the DOJ article that came out with this, was it that or was it the Tribune? Anyway, somebody removed that. I think the DOJ removed that because that could be just as explained as, and people did say this, that's for the kids, that's for the grandkids. But now we know the family members could have been victims. We don't know. So I'm not sure if this means anything or not, but a lot of people do have these little whimsical places in their homes. I don't know. And like I said,
he's got no kids living with him, presumably. This is for when
Not
the
little
grandkids
kids.
or the great-grandkids come over to visit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So I don't know, by removing it, if the DOJ or whatever, they determine, maybe his wife has said, oh no, I made that for the grandkids. Even so.
Or maybe it's neighbor kids. We don't know at this point.
Yeah. Well, we do know that from one of my sources that lived in the ward when he was back in the 80s and 90s, they had sleepovers all the time. His kids were very popular. Everybody allegedly wanted to hang out with Wade's kids. So there were all kinds of sleepovers with kids from the ward. You want to be where the popular kids are. And so, it was a fun, you remember those houses in the 80s, right? Everybody hang out. Everybody wants to go over there. And apparently that's what Wade's house was, with lots of kids and lots of fun, sleepovers like that.
Lots of things that little children would find attractive and make them want to be there.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good way to say it. So, all right. I'll read this one, Chris. Okay. And once you see the timeline, you will see how fascinating and calculating this is. Wade Christofferson also looked online. So he's looking about who can report what. He's already told the brothers that he is going to start the repentance process. Christofferson also looked online about leaving the United States, the charging document says, and texted a family member in Arizona on November 11th to ask if he could come there for an open-ended stay starting on November 13th. What do you guys think about that? And that's obviously from the search history on the phone. How do I get the hell out of here, right?
I think that will be brought up in one of his first hearings in Ohio about the setting of bail and whether he should be released on his personal recognizance. The prosecutor will be bringing that up front and center to the judge as to why he should not be released on his personal recognizance, because there's a fear of flight or a fear of his fleeing the jurisdiction.
Yeah, and that makes sense. So, but again, he said, I'm going to go work with my bishop. I'm really, really sorry. How do I get out of the United States? It just seems like maybe he had second thoughts about that repentance process and just wanted to, get clear. I don't know. All right.
Well, he's using his own code with his Mormon family, isn't he?
Oh, that's interesting.
The code is, hey, I'm taking care of this. I'm going back to the bishop again, I'll bet, because they know about this past. Come on. And he's going back to the bishop again to start the repentance process. So I'm being responsible. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. And this is like sanctuary. And I'm holding on to the bishop so that you know, you guys don't have to call the police. We didn't call them before, apparently. We don't have to now. I'm doing the right steps. I'm going to make things right with God.
Yep. All right, let's move on. I think RFM, it's your turn to read this one.
It's not clear why Wade Christofferson was in Utah by November 20th. That's a comma, but I'm going to make it a period.
Yeah.
I wish the church would let us make it a question mark.
Yeah. What the hell was Wade Christofferson doing in Utah on November 20th when he was booked into the Salt Lake County jail? Had he modified his Arizona or Aruba plans and he was stopping in Utah on the way, even though that would also be a place where he would likely suspect he could be arrested if these allegations are correct and he had perpetrated there as well? What was he doing? And was his entire family, who kind of knows about D. Todd, I'm expecting, and his position in the church, and now his even higher position in the church, you're going to have to go talk to D. Todd and clear this up one way or another, and he's going to make the call. I don't know. Speculation. Okay, he was booked into the Salt Lake County Jail on November 20th on the warrant on the charge from Ohio. Utah's court docket does not indicate where he is in the extradition process back to Ohio, which was ordered November 25th by a Utah federal judge. What this means is, if it was ordered November 25th, it was probably done without the necessity of a hearing, which makes sense. It was done by agreement by Wade that he waived extradition, and therefore the judge ordered him extradited November 25th. They then contacted Ohio that he's ready to be picked up. They sent out the federal marshals who picked him up on December 3rd and likely have him back in Ohio now.
Yeah, and I will point out that on December 2nd, Tuesday, his brother D. Todd Christofferson was giving a wonderful Christmas devotional at BYU without batting an eye. Do you think he knew that his brother was going to be in the custody of federal marshals the next day and moving back to Ohio?
All I know is that Michael Corleone was at his godchild's baptism.
Yeah. Time for the impression.
Yeah. Create distance, huh? Be somewhere, give a talk, huh?
Yeah.
And everybody knows where you are when the stuff is going down.
Yep, business as usual. Okay, let's see. Okay, here we are to the timeline. So maybe, Bill, I think you might be good to go through this. Now, I had my friend, Unoriginal Jim, because I was busy trying to scramble and put this together. I said, can you go through this article and just put together a timeline according to this Tribune article of those, 3 weeks? Because I think it's pretty telling when you see things in order of what allegedly was happening. So if you want to, I know you probably haven't seen this before, Bill, but I bet you can. You can.
Today
put this
is
together.
December 5th. This was 1 week ago today that this all cracked open. That's how I say week. This is 1 month ago today.
That's what I mean. It's all been open. It's all been within a month. So
November 5th, the Utah girl's father overheard a FaceTime call between his daughter and Christofferson. During that call, Christofferson allegedly asked to see the girl's snow and friends, code word for genitals and nipples per the charging documents. Afterwards, the girl went into a bathroom closet. Her father opened the door moments later and saw her lifting her shirt to the camera. I'll just say here, I'll just note, on November 5th, Christofferson is in Ohio.
Yes.
November 6th, the day after the overheard FaceTime, Christofferson allegedly sent a text message to the girl's father, quote, "I am deeply sorry for what I have done and will be meeting with my bishop to start the repentance process." According to the charging documents on November 11th, Christofferson texted a family member in Arizona asking if he could come there for a, quote, open-ended stay, unquote, starting November 13th. He also looked online about leaving the United States. November 12th, police started investigating after the Utah man's brother in Ohio reported that Christofferson had allegedly sexually abused his daughter too. Christofferson also allegedly admitted to the Ohio father that he sexually abused his 10-year-old daughter several years ago more than a dozen times. According to prosecutors, that the child had been abused 15 to 20 times. November 20th,
And that would be a state prosecution. And so the state police would have been involved in the investigation of that allegation.
November 20th, Christofferson finds himself in Utah. He was formally charged in Ohio federal court with attempting to sexually exploit a minor and with coercion and enticement, and he's booked into jail that same day in the state of Utah. November 20th through the 25th, the publicly known story of his arrest and pending federal charges came to light thanks to Floodlit. November 25th, the federal case was unsealed. Prosecutor's office officially announced the charges. Investigative outlets report there may be 9 to 12 alleged victims spanning up to 40 years. Let that sink in. 9 to 12 alleged victims spanning up to 40 years across Illinois, Ohio, and Utah. Church discipline records and prior annotations discussed in activist reporting, unverified by the church publicly. November 25th, extradition to Ohio ordered November 25th by a Utah federal judge. December 3rd, Wade Christofferson was moved into U.S. Marshals custody, according to the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office.
Yeah, so that kind of puts it in perspective. What any observations about that timeline, RFM? And it's such a mystery about the 20th. Like Unoriginal Jim said there, suddenly found himself in Utah. How and why?
On his way to Arizona.
That is a possibility.
It was a dog leg in the journey.
Did have a little twist and a turn up there to Salt Lake City, didn't it?
Yeah, it's like Moroni going out there to dedicate a temple on the way to Cumorah.
Is there any advantage to turning yourself in Utah? I mean, if we could assume that allegedly there was some, I don't know, like my one source had said that D. Todd turned him, took him, escorted him, turned him in. Is there any benefit to turning yourself into the system here in Utah?
Yes.
Yeah.
And not
Number
Ohio?
one, it's going to play better for you when you're asking to be released on your personal recognizance that you turned yourself in. And number two, it takes away the problem of driving or going to the airport to fly back to Ohio and getting arrested there in front of everybody.
Okay. And again, that's completely alleged. I just have the one source that said that might have happened. It's such a mystery those days. But if
I
you
think
look
Bill has
at,
another idea about why it might be a good idea to turn
okay.
yourself in.
In a church that has done sex abuse cover-ups like as if it's part of the program, it doesn't hurt to at least drive up to Salt Lake City, kiss the ring, and see if anything can be done. And only when the top leaders of the church, again, I'm throwing this out as a possibility, only when the top leaders of the church get together and go, can we figure out a way out of this? No, we can't. This would not look good. This is definitely not one of these ones that we can do anything with. Then it would make perfect sense for D. Todd to turn his brother in.
Yeah, it would be about the only thing you could do. It would be part of the strategy. It could have been allegedly a strategy meeting with Curtin McConkie trying to hammer it all out, figure it all out, and then that's part of it. So, but it is interesting to see if you look, it happens. He's talking to the brothers, he's apologizing, and then very quickly, fight or flight. I got to get out of here.
Yeah.
I got to lay low. And then I think it just everything just kind of crushes them, right? There's no way out this time.
By the way, believers will come in, believers will watch this, and they will say, you guys are making a lot of assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
It would be really easy to get rid of those assumptions by the church stepping forward and answering about 10 questions. And I've been writing them down this entire episode, so I will name them at the end. There's a whole host of questions that if you were just a transparent, honest, vulnerable church, and you have no guilt in this whole situation, you should be able to easily step forward and answer questions. I will bet, and I'm guessing all the members that are watching, all the believers who are watching will also know intuitively that the church will not step forward and will not answer these questions because for one reason or another, it doesn't benefit them to do so.
Right now, they're not going to do anything until it becomes such a big problem that they feel compelled to, which is why they're always late to everything. And it looks like they're backing and filling because they are all the time.
No,
So
and I
right now
haven't
they're just
seen this.
waiting to see if this becomes so big that they
Yeah.
need to say anything about it.
Yeah, I haven't seen this nationally anywhere. I emailed Michael Resendez. I don't know, but I haven't seen this nationally anywhere. So now the church does have a Christmas devotional coming up on Sunday, but I realize, they could make a statement there, but it's recorded. So
Yeah, and it's a
nothing there.
Christmas devotional.
Nothing to see there. Yeah, it's a Christmas devotional.
If Wade
So
Christofferson, if
This-
Wade Christofferson were as prominent as Tim Ballard, they would have handled it differently.
oh,
this
that's
isn't
a whole
as
nother
big,
thing.
I think, in the national eye as the SEC.
Yeah.
And we already have a blueprint for how they handle something even bigger. And that's to simply say we consider the matter closed and not address it at all.
Yep, that's true. So the rest of the slides are the things that you added, Bill. So I will just let you take, you can keep your slides, you can go through your questions. I'll let you kind of lead it for the rest of it, because these are the thoughts that you had put up on the second half of the slideshow. So you take it away from here.
All I was trying to do was to ensure that the parts of the paper were included. So there may be duplication here. I don't know. I'll just note allegations this severe involving minors, grooming, coded language, cross-state abuse, obviously institutional trust. There are questions that do need to be answered. The accused is a sibling of a top church leader. Again, with a annotation removed. So how does the church handle sex abuse cases with annotations? Where is the accountability? How does oversight work? How do church connected individuals, the family and friends of top level leaders in the church, how do they get treated differently when they're accused of things? We've had issues in the past with nepotism seeming to favor certain folks. The LDS Church publicly emphasizes that when abuse occurs, the first duty is to protect victims and vulnerable individuals. But like me and you guys and many others, critics argue that mechanisms like a 24/7 hotline for bishops that goes straight to the legal team may be more about protecting institution legally than about justice or healing. For people inside or around the faith, the case could reopen a deeper trauma, the tension between faith and the institution versus vulnerability of individuals, especially children, when even trusted family or church adjacent members abuse power. And I don't necessarily need to go over all of these. These were just to make sure that we had certain things included. I do. This one here I thought was at least interesting. What to watch for next, what we don't know yet. The formal federal case is under seal, meaning public access to full evidence and counting of victims may be limited for now. We don't know the full scope. How many victims over how many years? Again, at this point, we're being told 9 to 12 over 40 years across 3 states. Man, each one of those 3 categories is beyond the norm. This is in Wade Christofferson's life. If these charges prove to be true, if this story proves to be true, which it seems like it comes from too many angles, there's too much smoke for there not to be fire. You have a man who carried out systemic abuse on children his entire life, and a church that on one level or another at a very minimum helped cover it up with policies that allowed him to continue to serve around members as if he had done nothing wrong.
Can I add something to that, Bill?
Please.
Right now, the church is in a better position than it might be otherwise right now, with the facts we know right now, okay? Because this didn't happen in a church setting. This happened in a family setting, apparently, all right? On the other hand, if they had reported this guy to police when, decades ago, like when he got excommunicated apparently for 5 years, and when was that period of time, Rebecca?
It would have been in the early 2000s. And then
So
he would have had to apply for rebaptism. That would
he
have
would have
had
had
to
to
have been
register as a
approved.
sexual offender, and he would have had conditions
Yes.
put on him that he could have no contact
Oh, if
with
it would have
minors, which would have
legally,
meant
yeah.
that the
Yeah.
FaceTime would have been a violation of his
Mhm.
conditions of parole and would not have been permitted by the father.
Yeah.
So there are things that would have happened if it had been reported initially that could have gone a long ways toward keeping it from happening in the past year. That's one thing I'm saying. The second thing is, honestly, I know that manpower is limited, but every child in every ward that this guy was a bishop of in the last 3 callings, and maybe even before that, should be brought in for an interview. Now, a lot of them will be adults by now, but still, They all need to be interviewed and find out, did anything happen? Hopefully not. But that is one stone that cannot afford to be left unturned.
Yeah. It's also unclear what additional charges, either federally or in state courts, especially given the allegations involve both Utah, Ohio, and what was the third state?
Illinois.
Utah.
And they talked about Nauvoo, which
Mhm.
is the first thing that I thought this might be allegedly family, where you visit in Utah where they live, they come to your house in Ohio, you go on a family reunion trip to Nauvoo,
It's on a trip.
specifically Nauvoo.
Yes.
What are you doing there except for visiting the historic site? So that's what made me think, what kind of a child would be naturally in all those three places?
Mhm.
And to me, early on, before this other stuff, I thought, could it allegedly be somebody in the family?
Yeah. And then lastly, how the church and its leadership responds publicly, which my hunch is they will do what they always do, which is they've got some figurative blood on their hands here. And what they always do when that's the case is they stay as far away from addressing it as possible. So whether they'll respond publicly, whether they stick to protocol or go beyond it, will set a tone for accountability and perceived perfectionism. I'll just say, here are the questions I've got. When did Wade go to Utah exactly? Why did he go to Utah? Who did he talk to? Did he meet with D. Todd Christofferson or top leaders of the LDS Church? When did the church know about this most recent set of charges? When did and how did the church handle previous instances of alleged abuse? When did they remove the annotation? Why did they remove the annotation? And who approved the removal of the annotation? Those are all questions that I think in a healthy religious system, those are questions that someone in church authority should be rushing to the stage to answer, the questions of, to show how healthy things are handled, to show how Christ would do things. I don't think Christ is running from those questions. One must wonder why the church would.
And by the way, that's a great point, Bill. The very silence of the church is a testament to how little respect they have for the alleged victims. This is how they feel about the victims versus how they feel about the church. Their silence in this circumstance says it all.
Yeah. And when you talk about what did D. Todd Christofferson know and when did he know it, let's not forget that it says, and I'm reading off Floodlit, approximately 2018. I mean, we can conjecture all we want. Did he know before? Could he have known before? All those decades. But in 2018, a relative, according to Floodlit, of Apostle D. Todd Christofferson alerts D. Todd Christofferson of abuse allegations by an alleged victim. So this is what they're saying. Again, a relative. You just can't get away from this scenario where, we're talking about people allegedly in the ward in the 80s and 90s, according to the victims I've talked to, the victims Floodlit has talked to. Then, like you said, allowed to repent. Nothing ever makes it past the church as far as, law enforcement, nothing put in place to stop this person. And horrifyingly, could it allegedly then have trickled out into, the family, the posterity? No protection for the family, for the members in the ward. I mean, that is the part that is just sickening to me.
Unto the third and fourth generations, Rebecca, unto the third and fourth generations.
And the Salt Lake Tribune, at the very least, out of due diligence, has a responsibility to reach out to the church to get those questions answered and force the church at a bare minimum to decline to comment.
As opposed to removing information from the original article, possibly at the request of the church.
Yeah.
We've seen this before. This isn't baseless speculation. Have we not seen this exact kind of thing before, Rebecca?
I think we've seen it before. Yeah.
Over and over.
Over and over. Yeah.
Then the only other thing I got here, I put this was the data points off of Floodlit. This isn't my work, but I put it into a visually appealing graphic. And it was essentially making 6 points that for the believer who wants to say, you guys are making this about D. Todd Christofferson and the LDS Church, when in reality, it's just a sibling who did a thing that's awful and atrocious, but it's not the church's fault. And my point is, this is why it is the church's fault. Mormon apostle D. Todd Christofferson allegedly knew as early as 2018 that his brother Wade allegedly sexually abused a child in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Number one. Number two, Wade Christofferson has at least 9 to 12 alleged child sexual abuse victims dating back to 1985 in 3 U.S. states, Illinois, Ohio, and Utah. Number three, according to multiple alleged victims and their relatives, Wade Christofferson was excommunicated in the 1990s, several years after the church officials first became aware of allegations of child sexual abuse against him. Now, we know that annotations can only be removed with the First Presidency's approval. Does it take First Presidency approval to put an annotation on a record?
Well, this is one thing that I did learn from the source I was talking about in leadership. And he said, of course, the person would be excommunicated for CSA, and they have to make reports of disciplinary councils that go to Salt Lake. And he said it's like the job of a admin to look at this record and go, oh, CSA, flag, so if the system works, there's no way around getting that annotation if your church discipline was for that. So the First Presidency probably isn't aware of those things. It's just a clerical, discipline for CSA. I'm putting this on it. So although I still, and I have these arguments all the time on different things I post, different social media sites where faithful members are saying, D. Todd could not have known all those years, but I just feel like some people in upper church leadership would know. And when I make that argument, they say back to me, yeah, but they might have shielded him from that information. I don't know what that would have done. I would feel like they would have to have kind of a war room and go, look, one of our general authorities, one of our apostles has this going on, we better talk about this and figure out what's happening. So I don't know if those arguments hold any water, but again, it's all alleged. We don't know.
Bill doesn't look like he's buying this.
Yeah, I know.
I understand the critical thinking skills of a believer. I would say, how could he not have known?
That's what
It's his family. It's a multitude of instances. It's across various state lines. How could he not have known? And I have to go back to the annotation was removed, and that took First Presidency approval. How could he not have known?
And why is this Utah man so suspicious?
Well, and let me say this, though. Again, when you talk about what's confirmed and what's alleged, even the annotation is alleged. Victims have said this. Victims have talked to a stake president who said, yes, it was removed. Now, the rumor going around the ward at the time when he was excommunicated is that it was for an affair. An affair would never have an annotation. So if you believe the victim who said that they talked to a stake president who said that the annotation was removed, then the discipline was for CSA because the annotation would have necessarily had to have been put there. But when you really drill down on what's alleged, what's a victim saying it, like we talk about before RFM, the victim's testimony is the evidence, right? So it's hard to separate all of that, but there are some arguments being made out there that there never was an annotation. He's never done any of this. It was simply an extramarital affair that he was excommunicated for. I think this article that we went over today, where his own words say, I am sorry, I have done this, I need to repent, kind of blow that argument out of the water. But there's a lot of circular reasoning going on around this. And I guess we do have to be careful when just a victim says something. I don't mean just a victim. When a victim says something as reporting something, how careful do you have to be? So,
yeah. And I'll just say that if he were excommunicated, which it sounds like he was, and there was a high council, which it would have been back then, because that's before they did the Bill Reel rule of not having the high council involved in this anymore, plus the stake presidency, plus a clerk. Okay. If that happened, and it's likely it did, that's at least 16 people, 16 adults, none of whom contacted police after learning about this.
And all of which today, whoever's living somebody could maybe speak up on such a thing. The church has to be worried at this point. There's a lot of people who know about the various components of this story. And again, we're making assumptions to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
Those could be easily cleared up if the LDS Church simply wanted to step forward and answer questions. This is not a church that does that steps forward and ever answers questions.
What I'm waiting is for the people who are grown-ups now. What I'm waiting is for the ones who say, yes, he touched me, and I went to my bishop and told him, and the bishop said he would take care of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is that. Well, and I have talked to relatives of victims who say the victim was a child, the victim has forgiven Wade, the victim wants to move on and doesn't want any part of it. So there's that in the church too, this forgiveness culture that you just don't want to go there. But my co-host Landon makes a good point. We had talked about this yesterday. You know, when a family member is not baptizing their child or attending a wedding, there are all kinds of touch points in the LDS Church that you would assume brothers, there might be a big family events, weddings. Why isn't my brother Wade in the temple with his son getting married? Or why isn't he baptizing his child? Or why isn't he conferring the priesthood? We hear all the time from post-Mormons, oh, yep, I was outed. I couldn't baptize my son. Everybody knows now, or I was outed, couldn't go through the temple with my missionary.
I had an affair,
it happens
Rebecca.
all the time.
I had an affair.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Maybe that's really what he thought. It was just that's a huge possibility. And maybe he did have an affair. Maybe it was both. We don't know. We can't know. No idea.
And I'll also just say it's sort of reasonable for us to make certain assumptions. I mean, again, it's the track record of the LDS Church. It has behaved in such a way over 200 years that it would be less rational to give the church the benefit of the doubt than it would be to assume the worst. Okay. Lastly, I'll just say here, I noted there again, allegations are that D. Todd knew as early as 2018. It's 9 to 12 children across 3 states. He was excommunicated several years after church officials first became aware of allegations of child sexual abuse against him. That's the allegation. By 2006, he was rebaptized. Church officials allegedly removed an annotation on Wade Christofferson's church membership record, allowing him access to children at church. Again, according to multiple alleged victims and relatives. This isn't coming from one person. Between 2006 and 2025, the Mormon Church assigned Wade Christofferson to work in 3 ward bishoprics, a Sunday school presidency, and other church callings, according to records obtained by Floodlit. And number 6, 2 bishops and a stake president in the 1990s, and an area authority 70 in 2025, all allegedly knew prior to Wade Christofferson's 2025 arrest that he had allegedly perpetuated child sexual abuse. Another stake president allegedly confirmed in 2024 that he knew the church had placed and then rescinded child protection measures against Wade. None of these 5 church officials told police about the alleged abuse. According to alleged victims, in at least 4 instances, both bishops, the 2024 stake president, and the 2025 area authority 70, alleged victims told Floodlit they reported their abuse personally to church officials. It is because of the church system, its process for handling things, and it's apparently allowing people who have committed sexual abuse to be permitted once again, once they perceive repentance has happened, to be in children's spaces again, that all of us, the general public, are less aware of abusers, potential abusers, such as alleged to be with Wade Christofferson.
It is all shrouded in secrecy with the apparent conviction that somebody above me will do something.
And in the chat, our friend Generally Unquotable is asking, was he married? That was the first picture that I showed at the beginning, he and his wife off of a Facebook page. And as I was able to look up, 5 children, I believe. And so, yes, he was just, regular guy in the ward, callings and all of that. So
this is the picture that was off the Facebook page, Rebecca.
This was the picture off I'm assuming the Facebook page has been disabled. But like I said, when this first came out, I was up in the middle of the night with and Ron Jorgensen, also up in the middle of the night. We started grabbing screenshots of things that we thought might disappear. So we have a lot of those. And that was when, I can't remember if he got it or I got it, but somebody got it. So again, it's a tragedy all around. And especially if it's family, even if I don't want to say family is worse than victim. It's all a tragedy. That's all I'm trying to say. I don't know.
Oh,
I
no,
get rattled. It's
absolutely.
such a horrible topic. It's just, and just the decades,
Yes. And it's this first of the two slides that really doesn't say the church is involved in any wrongdoing. Okay. It's the second slide. Once you get to the second slide, then the church becomes involved up to its eyebrows in covering up for this guy and permitting him continued access to children. Whether he used that in order to perpetrate against children at church, we do not know yet.
Right.
That much is fair to say, correct, Rebecca?
Oh, yeah. No, there's a lot. We noticed we said the alleged word probably 200
But
times.
at church, there's no
And at church.
information, even allegedly.
No, in the church building?
Yes.
No. Everything that I've heard from victims or relatives or victims are that they were that popular house in the ward where everybody went. If you grew up in my area, you know that house. Everybody hangs out. Everybody sleeps over. Everybody wants to be a part of the fun over there.
The house with the Harry Potter room.
Happened. Yes, that's where all the access happened when, everybody wanted to go and be with the popular kids. And, anyway, this is what I'm hearing from different victims, that popular house in the 80s and 90s, which gave complete access. So
one should maybe always worry about the house in the neighborhood where all the kids want to gather. Anyway, the amount of family abuse that seems like it occurred here, even if this didn't occur in a church building, there's also an element here of a bunch of Mormons and a Mormon family allowing this to be handled the way the church dictates these situations be handled, rather than anyone in that family picking up the phone and saying enough is enough.
And finally, they had enough. Unless this is the first time that they heard about it and it came from out of the blue, which is possible. But this was it as far as they were concerned, whether they were hearing about it for the first time or not.
Yeah. In other words, if all the allegations here are true, you probably shouldn't be staying with any of the Christoffersons.
Well, it's interesting. In my conversation with my leadership source, which was just last night about the annotation, we did talk about the church is increasingly facing legal action over things that happened not in the church, but because there was access through the church where leadership should have known. Think about the King County case, RFM, that you've been covering in your area, where the young victims, it didn't happen at church. They went over to his house, but the church knew there was an annotation on his record. He'd been in jail for 8 years. And, the members of the ward wrote letters to get him out. He's got to get out. He's our beloved brother in our ward, and he's let out. He's not in callings with youth, but he's made Santa, right? Or he's in charge of the program and he helps the kids put it together. Not on church property, I don't think. I mean, Santa maybe. So the church seems to be liable there. They're suing the church for allowing him back in.
The distinction there would be access allowed to children by the church, but these are children that he would not have had access to, or the same kind of access to, except for the church allowing him to be the Santa Claus and be continuing active in the church in spite of the fact they knew about his history.
That's true.
That would be different from, legally speaking, that would be different from a person who is taking advantage of relationships he has that are completely independent of the church. Such
Would you
as in a
consider
familial
kids
setting.
in the ward? I mean, that is a hard one. They're not at the church, but he knows them through church, allegedly, and they're coming to his house through church. But or are they just, exactly. There's a lot of gray area.
If that ends up happening, okay, then the church is going to be paying out the nose for a long time on this one.
Yeah. I don't know. Any final thoughts? I think I'm glad we're not going to probably cover this on the newscast on Monday, right? Because unless something new comes out,
there'll be more.
So there may be more. I know. I feel like we're all kind of getting a little, I don't know, drained a little bit by it, but it's important to talk about, and we have to keep going. So any final thoughts? I think we've done it. I think we've at least shared the 2 updates of he's now with the federal marshal and some of the more details that came out about the timeline and who the potential victims might have been. So.
Well, we've got over 1,000 people who've been watching this show live.
Wow.
I'm glad of that. It is an important subject. Rebecca brought this up this morning and said, "Hey, there's a new article. It's got all these new details." She's been finding out things. She has sources. She's talking to alleged victims as well. So she has all this information. And what she said is, we need to do a special edition of the newscast as soon as possible. So we arranged it. We did it. We're doing it now. And that's why. And if all of you could just hit the like button and hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any future things, because this was unplanned. This is not scheduled, right, in the normal course. And so we only, I think, Bill, we only began advertising it, or like whatever it's called, an hour before we went live. Well, that would be an hour that you would know it was coming if you got the notification because you're subscribed.
Yeah.
So please hit like and please hit subscribe, and please stay tuned for more reporting on this important case.
Yeah. I'll only add, we all get to watch what happens next. If this is a religious system that wants to do better than it's done in the past, it will not go silent about this. It won't just be quiet. It also won't brush it off and say something to the effect of, this isn't something we're going to talk about. We consider the matter closed. It won't do that. It'll step forward and it'll answer the questions that need to be answered so that people can surmise whether their children are safe inside this system. And so now we all sit and wait to see which of those three it does.
Do you guys have Mormonism After Dark tonight? Somebody was asking. You're doing double duty today. You guys are great. So yeah, don't.
And I'm getting ready for my Radio Free Mormon episode. I'm going to record tomorrow morning, hopefully, for premiere tomorrow night on Saturday.
Wow. So yeah, so never fear. Some people were asking in the comments, are we still going to have Mormonism After Dark? Yes, they are. Everything continues as normal, but we just wanted to jump on this information because yeah, there probably will be more over the weekend. Everybody keep your eyes out and let us all know. So, all right. Well, thank you, Bill. Thank you, RFM, for jumping on this very quickly, all of us together. And thank you to everybody that's watching or listening. And we'll sign off for now from the pop-up edition of the Mormon Newscast. Bye, everybody.
Good night.
That's a wrap for this week's edition of the Mormon Newscast. We appreciate you tuning in and sharing this time with us. Keep the conversation going and stay informed on all things Mormonism. Until next week, wishing you peace and joy. See you next Monday at 6 p.m. on the Mormon Newscast.